And the next speaker is the Earl of Dartmouth.
Thank you, Chairman. In principle, we strongly favour a trade treaty with Japan, but it has to be fair to both sides. At the moment, Japan retains numerous non-tariff barriers. It is very hard for a foreign company to acquire a company in Japan, and there can be undue political influence. The effect is that while Japan is always keen to export its own goods, it remains a complicated country in which to do business. Nonetheless, the gross domestic product of Japan is larger than that of France, Belgium and Italy combined. A meaningful trade agreement would be good for everybody. However, as my colleague Mr Schulz has alluded to, there are signs that the French and German automobile manufacturers and their lobbyists are seeking to frustrate or otherwise limit an EU-Japan trade agreement. That would be wrong. And this brings me to an important related point. Because there are so many different trade interests in the 27 member states, all of which have to be satisfied in some measure, it actually makes it significantly more difficult for the EU as an entity to conclude trade agreements than it would be for a single nation state on its own. Not easier, as is wrongly and often asserted. And that is why, for example, Switzerland, with a gross domestic product less than 1/6 of that of the UK alone, has had its trade agreement in place with Japan since December 2009, while this evening we are just talking about one.
Thank you very much. May I ask you if you accept blue card from Mr. Kamal?
Of course, I'd be delighted.
You have a floor, Mr. Kamal. Mike.
I apologise, dear colleagues, for not being able to hear my very quiet voice. The Earl, I wonder whether I could ask you this question. You rightly said that Japan can be a very complex country and it can be difficult to access markets in Japan and to also take over companies. But could not the same be said of some countries in the EU? Could it not equally be said it could be difficult to access some EU countries and take over some companies in different EU member states? And therefore, are you not just another EU protectionist? And I wonder how you stand with regard to that accusation.
Let me first of all assure Mr Kamal that his tones, although soft, are both mellifluous and even sometimes musical. To address the very important, interesting point that he made in the next 20 seconds. Yes, many EU countries are protectionist. We are concerned in our country that it isn't the level playing field that it ought to be, and that is one of the strongest arguments why we in our political party believe that Britain should leave the EU and that the EU in its present form is unreformed and unreformable.
Thank you very much for a very interesting answer. And just now the next speaker, Mr.
Very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kamal, will you accept blue card from Mr. Earl from Dartmouth? You have a floor.
How very gracious, Dr. Kamal. You said in your speech, correctly in my view, that countries don't trade with each other. It's people and businesses that trade with each other. However, the leader of your delegation, Mr. Richard Ashworth, said on BBC television that 3 million jobs in the UK depend on UK-EU trade. On the basis of what you yourself has just said, do you agree with Mr. Ashworth?
I'm not sure how to address it. Can I call you William, or can I call you the good Earl? I won't call you the good Lord for fear of upsetting all those who are religious in this House. But what I will say to you is that there is no inherent contradiction between those two statistics, or those two facts. It is quite clear, as I said, that people and businesses trade with people and businesses in another country for mutual benefit. But actually, trade agreements can facilitate that, and lack of trade agreements can get in the way. But people still trade with people in other countries, even though there may be no trade agreement. So actually, there is no inherent contradiction between those two statements. But if you think there is, I would be willing to have a conversation with you afterwards, maybe over a cup of coffee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just now, the next speaker is Mr.